Welcome to Virtual Day here, FilmLit folks. The purpose of this presentation is to assist you with your Chapter 5 quiz. There are 10 questions, so I'm going to go through the PowerPoint here and at least touch on some of the things briefly that are going to come up within that quiz. Here's Abe Lincoln with the boombox to start us off. Starting out with question 1, I believe you have a question about the problems with sound in early film, if you will, as well as the solutions, which comes up on the next slide. Among those, soundproof blimp overhead sound booms. Take a look at those two slides to address that question. I believe it's question 1. Those early fixes, and then as time passes, come up with some fixes to those problems so sound can be heard, among other things, be considered more realistic. Obviously, we have editing. So take a look at those first couple slides there when answering that question with regard to the original problems as well as the fixes that people landed upon. So here we have dubbing, not to be confused with dabbing. Dubbing is just that process of adding sound after filming. Very simple there. And this happens in a large majority of action movies. Think about what a punch actually sounds like. I've never been punched, so I'm not exactly sure. But that process is just called dubbing, adding sound after recording. You have a question about dramatic irony regarding close-ups and sound. And think about, if a car were to be breaking down, you have a woman who is playing noise loudly in her car on her way home from work. And all of a sudden you have a close-up that shows something coming loose on a tire. Dramatic irony, you know something that she does not. That can be established with combination of close-up and sound. Silent theater, you do have a question about this. How do we establish the bad guys? A couple ways to do that. Those approaches here are outlined on the screen. Sound montage, you do have a question, I believe it's true or false, about Orson Welles. Basically, he creates this idea that you don't need music if your sound is engaging. In other words, think of walking into a party and you have all these different conversations and the effect is almost musical. And that's something that Orson Welles developed called sound montage. Think of just, a montage of sounds becomes musical in itself. Sound effects, sound is an experience, right? You have some questions about pitch, volume, and tempo. And the biggest thing to take a look at here on this slide is regarding mood, regarding tension. And now kind of just think about these things as you take a look. Pitch, volume, tempo. We have different understandings symbolically as well as literally translated here, but kind of self-explanatory as well. Off-screen sounds create anxiety. We've talked about things that we can't see on the screen or at the edges of the screen, all in an effort to create anxiety in the viewer. You have a realist question, I believe, on the quiz, so take a look at that. This is my favorite thing that Chapter 5 actually does here, and you have a question about this. Take a look at this paragraph. And I just think it's incredibly well done what this film does in this specific scene about a kind of grouchy son in a breakfast situation. One of your questions asks you about that. So go ahead and take a look at this slide here. I think it's really interesting. And my question really is, do we think this much into film? And how often do you have scenes like this take place? Bonnie and Clyde. Some of you may be familiar with this storyline. Also a very wonderful Jay-Z and Beyonce beat from the early 2000s. Young B cruising down the west side. Bonnie and Clyde, check it out. O2 Bonnie and Clyde, I believe. Back to the whole silence and foreshadowing thing. Silence generally not great. More modern example, Tony Soprano. Some of your parents may have watched this. Great mob show if you're into that. People were very upset. They didn't know exactly how it ended because it goes black screen. At the very end of the entire series, people spend hours and hours and hours watching this show and then they don't even know, does he live or does he die? That silence generally foreshadows not a great situation. Music, we'll get into that more in class. Mickey Mousing, there's a question about this, just this idea that movement will mimic the sound that is taking place. Donatello, the best Ninja Turtle, not an opinion, that's a fact. Then we have some irony in music, back to Bonnie and Clyde. We are rooting for them, despite the fact that they are robbing people. So we have this spirited banjo music. Page 241 gets into that a little bit, giving these sequences a sense of jolly fun. Crime is fun, question mark. So sometimes some irony there with regarding music. And in this case, we don't necessarily want Bonnie and Clyde to be killed. It's a question about musicals, two types, realistic and formalistic, as we've already kind of touched upon here. Realistic musicals presented as plausible. That could happen. Then we know formalistic, what those look like. Just touched on this. Spoken language. There's a question about this, specifically this bottom part that's bolded here. The only exception to where films don't include fewer words than books is William Smooth Billy Shakespeare, where his plays are performed with all the dialogue obviously there. But take a look at this bold sentence there at the bottom and think it's only 5 words. I will see him tomorrow. I will see him tomorrow. I will see him tomorrow. Try to stop me. Think of all the ways that, just based on the way words are stressed, the way these words are spoken, the different interpretations there. I will see him tomorrow. Based on what we stress here, this can be interpreted in many different ways. So with spoken language, we can interpret this, right? Whereas if it's written, we need that context, which talks here in this last slide, the fracture activity that drove y'all nuts because we didn't have the subtext, which is this slide here. You didn't have the dialogue. You didn't know who was speaking. You had the dialogue, excuse me. You didn't know who was speaking. You had no subtext. You need all those things to truly understand what's going on, and that is why the fracture activity was so difficult. You didn't have any of that information. You didn't have stage directions. You didn't even have speakers. So that's a brief look here at sound, folks, for your quiz for today. I do want you to also look at that discussion. It's kind of an analysis of Fight Club. Flashbacks and sound. We'll wrap this up here. Movie Gone Girl includes a voiceover. Lots of movies have voiceovers. But is that speaker truly reliable? Something we may get into later in class. But flashbacks sound also something that's included there. And then just to wrap it up here, some things just to think about, and you can see this PowerPoint on your quiz as well. Some things to think about when we're analyzing sound. Just a few here, maybe a dozen. All right. Folks, we'll see you later. Reach out if you have questions. Good luck with Chapter 5 Sound. We'll see you Friday, hopefully.